Howdy, howdy, all you bad mofos out there in the Black Army radio realm. Welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to the movement. It's good to have you. Whatever platform you're listening on, we'd really appreciate it. If you gave us a 5-star rating and send an episode to a friend, man, we got a lot of cool investigations and some interviews that are decent and stuff. So shotgun that sucker out. We're currently operating on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. I think there's a couple other platforms that we're on. We also have Patreon. And so Patreon it's like it's free on there. You don't have to pay to be on there. Oh my God, Joel has to continuously correct me with the name of that thing. It's just, I don't know why it evades me. It evades my cranial capacity at any time of the day, apparently. But there is, like, you know, they were talking about putting some merch on there maybe or something. We'll see. But I mean, really primarily what it's for right now is like you can ask us questions. We can give you shout outs. You can, hey, also, dude, like for real, if you guys have any ideas for guests, people that would be willing to come on, I could talk about anything from psychedelics to history to politics to, I mean, I don't give a shit. Like, it doesn't really matter. Anything interesting. And you throw it in there in Peloton. What is it called again, Joel? Patreon. Throw it in there to Patreon, and we'll get to you. And so today is actually the freaking Atlantis day, and I got a bunch of information on this, man. Like, I got a bunch of information on Atlantis, and guess what, people? Everybody always talks about Plato. Oh, it's Plato. Oh, he's talking in his, you know, philosophy stuff, just using, you know, Atlantis as an allegory, like the allegory of the cave, you know, when he talks about that. It's like, no, there's 9 sources. There's at least 9 sources, and there's actually more than that. We just haven't found them, but there's other sources that have been references past those 9 sources. There's a ton of sources talking about Atlantis. Tons. So we're gonna get into that. And I lose you?
You're good.
Do we lose you?
No.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say something.
I'm here.
And so anyway, like, no. Yeah, there's a ton of sources with that, and you know, good to go. I think we got some good stuff there. And I'm going to turn it over to Joel for a little bit. We're going to do a little bit of current events stuff. We always do. We can't kind of help ourselves. And we'll kind of riff off that. And especially when it comes to American ranchers and farmers with what's going on with beef right now. Pretty interesting. What's up, Joel? How we doing, buddy?
Yeah. Doing good. A little tired. Long day. Smacked myself in the face earlier this week with a big chunk of thick tube cardboard, and just been one of those weeks. Feels like I been stepping on the rake and racking myself proverbially all fucking week. But
nice. Do you get punched in the mouth?
With the rancher stuff,
I mean, that's in the nose.
That I've hit, with a piece of cardboard, self-inflicted. Like 7 o'clock in the morning to start the day off.
Hey, just be honest, man. Your old lady slapping you around. Your old lady slapping you around a little bit, squaring you away. Sometimes we all got to get squared away, brother. That's okay.
It's the domestic, you know. But yeah, with that cattle shit, that's pretty interesting, and mostly with mostly because I know a lot of people within the cattle industry, a lot of my friends, a lot of their families, a lot of people back home, a lot of good people too. And with what's going on with that, Trump essentially took 22 tons of meat from Argentina that China refused to take. They were trying to sell to China first, and China refused to take it because it tested really high for a lot of antibiotics, and antibiotics that are known to be harmful to humans. So what does Trump do? He buys all that beef, and then he cuts tariffs on beef that's being imported into America, which is one of those things that it'd probably help our market out better if we're still continuing to tariff that and driving, like there's, and then just like some cause and effect. This is just a little search I did on to see like what is going to be the cause and effect from this happening, and essentially crashing domestic live cattle prices, artificially low prices. The plan allows up to 300,000 metric tons of ground beef to enter the U.S. tariff-free over the next 90 days. So this will cause undercutting profits. Trump claims that imported meat will sell at 25% below market rate. This floods the market and threatens to tank the record high prices domestic ranchers are finally earning. Easing recent gains after enduring multiple years of drought and soaring feed costs, it forces them to shrink their herds to the lowest level since 1951. Ranchers were just starting to turn a profit. Decentivizing long-term, this is another big thing, decentivizing long-term herd rebuilding. So killing the investment. Rebuilding a cattle herd takes years and immense capital. Market distribution. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association notes that dropping cheap subsidized foreign meat into the market completely destroys the certainty and predictability ranchers need to breed more cattle. Shrinking production. Industry advocates to argues this will trap the U.S. in a cycle of shrinking domestic production and higher reliance on foreign suppliers. Funding the competition while taxing Americans. Geopolitical betrayal. Ranchers feel betrayed by a 20 billion U.S. currency swap designed to stabilize Argentina and the ally country that has concurrently been selling soy to China while China boycotts American farmers. And this goes back to like Project 2025 and them empowering some of the South American governments to try to make it hemispherically. And a lot of these, a lot of these governments in South America and their ties to Israel is another huge scary part. The only countries in South America are fighting kind of this American takeover is countries that aren't part of APAC. So it's pretty interesting to look into as well. And I could go on, but essentially we gave at the beginning of Trump's presidency, we gave Argentina $20 billion to bail out their economy because they were trying to do some stuff with their economy. Musk was also involved with that. And essentially trying to do capitalism on steroids, and it failed like it always does, and they had to get bailed out. And now we do a huge fucking beef deal with them, and why it cuts the throat of our ranchers, And to anybody who think this is a good idea, one, I want to be, and this is a fucked up part, and this goes to like the food we're eating. We're getting like right now, there's been so many regulations removed from the food that we eat that like we're taking food that China's rejecting, like we're becoming that fucking country, and China's probably just laughing like, yeah, let them get fat, let them get fucking fed, let them suck their money with healthcare because they're out of shape, like, and all in the same breath, we're fucking our ranchers, it's crazy.
Uh-huh. It's funny too, like, it's not funny, but you probably don't know this. You know what percentage of self-proclaimed ranchers, farmers voted for Trump in the last election?
I would probably say 80-90%.
Yeah, it's exactly
Easily.
right, pretty much at that 80% mark. Yeah, pretty much at that 80% mark.
Right.
And dude, I mean, what the fuck, bro? I mean, this is he's the most anti-America first president that we've had in our lifetime. He's also personally responsible for accumulating by far the most amount of debt out of all the fucking presidents in American history. Like, and it's not even close. I mean, the amount of debt that he's accumulated, and basically, if you think about like 5.5 years into him being a president of this country, dude, and then like he's basically just telling the farmers and ranchers to go fuck themselves. If you're a rancher and you're a farmer out there, go fuck yourself. We don't care. They don't care. Like, remember what he said about when they were like, "Hey, man, Mr. President, isn't this going to hurt the American cattle industry? Isn't this going to hurt the American farmer?" And he was like, "Haven't you seen Argentina? Argentina's dying. Argentina's dying. They need our resources. Argentina's dying." And you're like, "Hey, the American public is dying, bro. The American public." Okay, we played that little montage we played fucking a couple weeks ago or whatever about him promising not to go with Iran. It was like 2.5 minutes of all these different speeches of him promising not to go to war with Iran, not to go back into the Middle East, not to go back into the forever wars, dude. It's like everything about this dude is bullshit. Every single thing about this guy is bullshit. He's a completely bullshit human being. He's a fucking complete liar. He's more than likely, almost for sure, a pedophile. He's enriched himself. He's done more insider trading than all the politicians in American history combined, made more money than all of them combined, and still going. I mean, dude, corrupt. Man, this is a wildly corrupt administration. This is a wildly corrupt anti-American first administration, bro. And this stuff with the cattle industry and the farmers and ranchers is probably the biggest, because I'm like you, bro. I mean, I grew up cowboying, you know what I mean? And I grew up outfitting. My dad was an outfitter, and we did all that stuff for years and years. And grew up as a kid. It was kind of all I knew, bro, was that kind of stuff, that kind of lifestyle. And for him to turn his back on ranchers and farmers and basically tell them to eat shit and die, and that the people of Argentina or the Argentina government needs to be able to survive at the cost of your ranch and your farm, dude, is just, it's catastrophically horrible, bro. It's catastrophically horrible.
And I think this goes back to him trying to they want like the acre trader, the land trading app that JD Vance has ownership in, which essentially is all this land bought up by corporate companies. They want to disenfranchise the family farm so it gets bought up by corporate fucking. I mean, that's capitalism, America. That's what it is. They want to disenfranchise that family farm, make it so hard for them to make a living that they have to give it up, and the corporations just come in. They're all, and taking whatever little bit of control we have out of it, because especially with the meat packing industry, you already have to go to 3 main packers before your meat goes out. So there's this middleman within all of it, versus it used to be from the farm to the butcher to the local store. Now it's from the farm to the meat packer and then spreads out, and they've already made it really hard because of the regulations with butchering and meat packing. And then they do something like this that just is going to disenfranchise an American farmer, and it's fucked up. And then this is like on top of just a real quick list of things we didn't need. $45 million military parade. Didn't fucking need that. Renovated ballroom, $290 million. Didn't fucking need that. Presidential golf trips, $150 million. Didn't fucking need that. Tax cut for the rich, $4 trillion. That would have really fucking helped. Detention facilities, $45 billion. The 250th anniversary celebration, $100 million. Fighter jet flyovers, $10 million. And the endless war, $132 billion and counting. And that's a low estimate as well.
Yeah,
so, I mean, just like for somebody who...
And we've lost 18 American service members that we know of as well. Killed. Remember how much shit Biden caught from the Afghanistan withdrawal? And there was that, I don't want to say it was a V-bid or a suicide bomber, whichever, at the that gate there in Afghanistan. I think it killed 15 Marines, 16 Marines. Forgive me if I don't know the number off the top of my head, but something like that. And conservatives absolutely went panicking over that. You know what I mean? Like just a complete waste of life for those guys during that withdrawal to have that happen. And here we are. We've got 18, 19 dead that we know of. We know the casualty rate is for sure higher than that. But they're not going to release it, at least not yet. And it's like, dude, I saw this post on Facebook. These are typical boomer Republican Fox News person, and they were just basically like, Obama gave Iran 500 whatever it was, 500 million, $1 billion, whatever it was in that deal, right? And then it said, we are now at war with Iran. Obama must pay. I'm like, God, you guys are, oh my God, you guys are out to lunch, man. You guys are so out to lunch. Holy shit. They'll convince themselves of anything at this point, dude. I tell you what, MAGA today, whoever's MAGA left out there, they're just as bad, if not worse, than like the worst of the left when it comes to like the Antifa people, right? Or like, the super duper leftists that everybody complained about for so long. It's like they're no better, dude. If you're still super duper MAGA and you can come up with a Facebook post like that saying it's Obama's fault that we're at war with Iran right now because Obama gave Iran some money, as if the deal that we already outlined what the deal was that we got for, like what the deal was going to be for Iran. Like Iran is bending us the fuck over, bro. Like it's going to make the Obama deal look like child's play, what they're going to get out of us now. And if you're still willing to toe that party line, dude, it's like it's just over for you. As an intellectual human being, you might as well just be a monkey because you obviously have no independent thought processes going on in your mind at all, dude. And this stuff with ranchers and farmers, man, like on top of that, like I don't know how in the hell you can justify this stuff with ranchers and farmers. I mean, they are by far the most conservative, probably like employment element, right? If you think about like an employment element in the United States, I mean, they've got to be in the top, if they're not the top 2 or 3 employment elements that are wildly Republican, wildly conservative, wildly pro-Trump. And he completely just shit on them. I mean, shit on them bad with this deal with Argentina.
Well, and it shits on them. It floods the market with cheap beef. And I think the biggest thing is, it's one thing if you have to adjust your prices a little bit, especially if it's a slow thing, but they're talking up to 300,000 metric tons of beef coming into America, and these farmers,
it's not even good
they're not going to know how to plan, like as far, it's beef that China rejected.
It's shitty meat.
And with that being said,
and we're going to feed it to our people.
I mean, but I think Trump's already pushing regulations away to pump our meat up with full of shit anyway. So I think that's just like par for the course. The whole Maha,
just like how the Maha
thing is bullshit.
Dead.
Like this, it's all bullshit, dude.
Dead. Dead. DED. Dead. The Maha movement is fucking dead. The entire, dude, we were played so hard by this guy, man. And for those of the people out there being like, Trump, you deserve it. You voted for him. You deserve what you get. All those people think that somehow, like, what were we supposed to vote for Kamala Harris? Is that a better fucking option? I mean, Jesus Christ. Is that really a better option if she would have been president? I mean, fucking Jesus. It's just, it's dumb and dumber. It's worse and worse. It's retard 1, retard 2. I mean, it does, you know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't make a fuck of difference.
Well, and the biggest thing is, and it's just like the media loop, like right now, like they have us trying to fight about women in basketball again. And like they try to get us all pissed off over social shit, dude. And it's dumb, dude. Like there's like 80% of this country agrees on stuff, but we disagree on social shit, and they have us fucking hating each other. And the left wing and the right wing, it's a patch, it's a tribe, and it's just like they got us right where I want us. Like I don't fucking, makes me sick, dude.
And one last thing really quick too, before we jump into Atlantis and all the good stuff associated with that, is Turkey is now mobilizing troops in Syria after that Israeli attack in that Turkish base in Syria, like we talked about last week. So more good news, but whatever, dude. Let's talk about freaking Atlantis, dude. Let's talk about the Atlantis, all the sources. Are we good? Do you have anything else, man? Are we good to push forward into ancient history behind us? What do you think? Sweet, let's do it. So Atlantis
Yes.
all the
we are good.
sources, all the locations, and all the ways they kept it from us. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. Atlantis. Like we said, standard treatments of Atlantis treated as, quote, that thing that Plato made up. That's pretty much how it's talked about, it seems like, especially in modern day academia, outside of the alternate history, alternate archaeology, people such as us. This episode dismantles that framing on two fronts. First, Plato was not the only ancient source. He's always described as basically being the only ancient source that references Atlantis. That is incorrect. He wasn't even the first, as a matter of fact. And also, Joel, some of these names and some of these places, and for those of you guys out there that are listening to this, I apologize right now, because there are some names and some places where I'm going to have a problem with figuring out how to say it. My lips aren't going to work right. And so I'm just throwing that out there right now. So if I dick up some of this stuff, I apologize. I'm not trying to, but it's definitely going to happen. All right. So like I said, he wasn't even the first source. Okay. Hellanicus of Lesbos wrote a work titled Atlantis before Plato was born. There was another guy, Diodorus Siculus, who's a 1st century BC dude. There is Marcellus, who's another guy. There is Aristotle, referencing Atlantis as well. There's Plutarch. There's Crantor, who was the first commentator on Plato's Timaeus. Now, Timaeus is basically what Plato wrote. It pretty much describes science, physics, and like the creation of the universe. And so whenever you hear us talk about the work that the Timaeus, that's Plato's like kind of most famous philosophical work. Okay. All describe Atlantis independently of Plato. As we said, all these people describe Atlantis independently of Plato, also with details that Plato did not include, which is probably also the most important thing, which means it's not just plagiarized. They're adding extra details that Plato either didn't know about or just didn't include with his source work. Okay. That is at least 7 independent ancient stories spanning 800 years on 3 different continents. So we're going to be talking about at least 7 independent ancient sources going over a period of 800 years, almost a millennia, on 3 separate continents. They're going to be talking about Atlantis. Okay, the second thing, the Sea Peoples, the mysterious naval confederation that appeared out of the Atlantic in the 12th century BCE. Okay, contributed decisively to the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse is a very interesting thing. We are going to talk about that a little bit. And according to their own Egyptian chroniclers, came from, quote, from the countries of the sea and, quote, from the islands, end quote. Okay, every mainstream historian has struggled to identify the homeland of the Sea Peoples. It was the Sea Peoples were even referenced in that movie that just came out with the fall of Troy. And that king, I'm brain farting his name right now. God dang it. Anyway, they referenced the Sea Peoples, which I thought was really, really interesting in the movie. Matt Damon played the king. Herodotus? I think I screwed it up. I don't remember. Anyway, great movie. The movie was actually really good. It caught a bunch of shit, from people saying that one trans girl or boy wasn't even Achilles. Like all those memes and stuff about that trans dude, that the former girl actor that's the boy now or whatever, that was playing Achilles, like wasn't playing Achilles. That was all crap. That was all bullshit. And so there you go. That's another thing, Joel, right? The culture war, right? Focusing on the culture war. Another great example of that crap. Yep. But anyway, exactly. Super duper cool. And they talk about in that movie, they talk about the freaking Sea Peoples, which was super interesting. Okay. Also, every mainstream historian has struggled to identify their homeland, like we said. If Atlantis was destroyed by a geological catastrophe and its survivors scattered, as multiple ancient sources, including Marcellus, explicitly claim, the Sea Peoples are exactly the population we would expect to appear on the historical record shortly after that event. It would make sense. They came from the middle of the freaking ocean, like far outside of their own realm, of their own world that they were inhabiting. Okay. And exactly the right geographic direction and location, with exactly the technological sophistication, such as, quote, advanced naval warfare, which is always described with Atlantis, that the coastal maritime civilization would preserve in their memory, whether it's written or whether it's storytelling. Okay. The Azores hypothesis, and Joel, this is where I land, bro. This is where I land. I've done a lot of looking on this stuff when it comes to Atlantis. It interests me a lot. And it interests me because it's one of those places that I think absolutely existed that we haven't discovered yet. It's kind of like Troy, right? Troy was just considered mythology for a long time. Troy didn't actually exist. It was just a tale, just like from that movie that I was just talking about, right? The fall of Troy, the Trojan horse, that whole story, the Trojan Wars. They found Troy. They found it. Took a while, but they did find it. Same thing with like Sodom, from Sodom and Gomorrah, right out of the Bible. Sodom's been discovered, but Gomorrah has also been discovered, right? And like the North Levant up there, kind of like in the North country of like going up towards, God, I want to say it's not in Israel. It's in is it Southern Jordan? I believe, I can't remember exactly, but a great book out there called Discovering the City of Sodom. There's been a ton of places like this, dude. That's ancient mythology stuff that ends up becoming reality the more sophisticated we get. And so I think Atlantis is going to be one of those. I think it's going to be one of those things. So the Azores hypothesis, this is the one that I roll with, bro, on where Atlantis was. We're going to get into deep on this because this is my fucking jam. This is where my research goes. And so we're going to talk about the Azores quite a bit. All right, this is my preferred location. Like I said, the Azores Plateau is a 400,000 square kilometer triangular oceanic platform on top of the mid-Atlantic ridge. It's right in the middle of the freaking Atlantic Ocean. A lot of people don't even know about the Azores Islands that exist today there, okay? Sitting mostly less than 2,000 meters below current sea levels, multiple studies confirm that at the Ice Age sea levels, which were 120 meters at least, lower than they are today, the plateau would have supported substantially larger islands that currently exist, substantially larger islands than currently exist there. Soviet oceanographer Maria Klenova's 1957 expedition on the Mikhail Lam on Azorov recovered rock samples. That's the name of the boat, the Mikhail Lam on Azorov, recovered rock samples from the Azores seafloor at 6,000 plus feet depth. Per her publicized findings, they could only have been formed under atmospheric pressure, meaning above water, not below water. Okay. Recent high resolution data has revealed geometric anomalies that Portuguese archaeologist Nuno Ribeiro has argued may be anthropogenic. Okay. What anthropogenic means is it was created, caused, or influenced by humans. So like a human structure, right? We talk about all those massive megalithics in our last episode of Doggerland, which was basically like Britain, Scotland, Ireland, and the sea levels were lower, exposed a lot more land, and now it's all underwater, but they found megalithic structures. That would be an example of an anthropogenic structure. Okay? This is really cool, bud. They're basically saying that they're seeing structures underwater in the Azores, deep underwater, that resemble pyramids, squares, circles, structures down there. It's also a very difficult, super difficult place to do ocean archaeology. It's in the middle of the freaking Atlantic Ocean. You think about coldness, you think about depth, you think about weather. It's a big problem. Okay. The Azores is not the only candidate location, however. Even though it's my preferred candidate location, we are going to talk about a few other locations. All right, competing theories include the Bahamas Banks, which is like the Bimini Road. That's been talked about a little bit by Graham Hancock. It's interesting. Antarctica is an interesting one via the Perry Reese argument or the Perry Reese map. And there's another book out there. And there's also, really before I get into that, there's also the Doggerland North Sea theory, okay, which is what I talked about just a minute ago. Doggerland is now submerged. Britain, Scotland, Ireland, sea levels low, more land, higher. That was also a place where people talked about Atlantis possibly being. Now, when it comes to the Antarctica one, dude, there's a book out there. It was actually classified by the CIA and by the feds up until really, really recently. It's called the Adam and Eve book. The Adam and Eve book. And it only recently became unclassified, which is interesting. And also there's parts of that book when you buy it. I have that book. When you buy it, there's parts of that book that you can tell have been it's kind of like the Epstein files, blacked out, right? Completely missing. You can tell when you read it that there's missing, and it actually has like sections that are kind of divided when you read that book, where you can see like where there's been something that's been omitted or blacked out. It's just like a missing paragraph. So it'll drop like a page, like half a page with no writing, and then it'll just be writing. So it kind of tells you that stuff was intentionally withheld from being public information. It's called the Adam and Eve book. Okay. And there's a theory in there with the Adam and Eve book where, and it's a catastrophe theory. It's basically a catastrophe book on global resets, catastrophes, stuff like that, which makes it even more interesting on why it was classified. Now, according to this book, this is a different theory. Okay. If you think about the Younger Dryas event, whether it's an asteroid event, a comet event, which is kind of like what we think triggered it, probably. This theory with the Adam and Eve book, it's different. It basically talks about the mantle heating up to the point to where the crust starts moving on the mantle almost fluidly. Okay. Almost like it's able to move more because the mantle has heated up so much that the crust can move faster and like kind of suddenly, if that makes sense. Okay. And then also has to do with magnetic poles. Now there's something going on with poles today that is kind of scary, right? Magnetic poles are moving really, really fast right now. I want to say, and I could be wrong, Joel, you could check this for me if you want. Like magnetic poles are moving, I think, at a faster rate right now than maybe that we've recorded in a long, long, long time. I mean, like the poles are moving fast. And this has something to do with the Adam and Eve book and that mantle getting warm and moving the crust. Now, I feel like I'm going to fuck this up, but this is another hypothesis for like global catastrophe and what could have happened to end the ice age and like the people of Atlantis. And like when you think about like the forbidden knowledge, right? When you think about the Watchers, Quetzalcoatl, the sages, like all of these different people that we've investigated, these different, I guess they wouldn't be people. Or maybe they were people, maybe they were just more advanced. It's just hard to say, or they could be aliens, UAP, call them gods, angels, whatever you want to call them. But this theory basically says that there's something to do with the poles. The poles have a sudden dramatic shift, and that mantle is really, really lucid underneath the crust. And when that happens, basically there's an immediate, like I guess you'd call it the plates, the tectonic plates. There's a huge dramatic shift, which would be like the biggest earthquake you could possibly imagine. But it actually moves. And in this book, it details and it describes how land masses will move completely out of place, almost like overnight, like crazy, right? Like Antarctica, where it is now, like it wouldn't have been there. They're basically saying that like 15,000 years ago, whatever it was, through this hypothesis, that entire landmass shifted. You know what I mean? And that also kind of helps explain why like the Piri-Reis map and some other more ancient maps, especially that are based on mythology, have Antarctica far before it was ever officially found. Yeah, go ahead, Joel.
So talking about the magnetic poles, so they're moving faster, but since about the 90s to about 2000, they've been moving on average faster. Accelerating about 9 kilometers, 6 miles per year to peak of 55 kilometers or 34 miles per year towards Siberia, though it has recently slowed to about 35 kilometers or 21 miles per year, but is still moving faster than any recorded history that we've seen. But that's been since 1990, actually.
I'll tell you what,
according to the Google's AI.
Right? I feel like 20 miles a year is a lot. Because when you get like, you got to think, when you talk about geology, everything is slow, man. Like the plates, we know that the Atlantic Ocean is getting bigger, right? The Pacific Ocean is getting smaller, but it's not measurable. Like, or you can't, it is measurable, but you can't like see it or feel it in any kind of a way. Like it's so minute that in our lifetimes, it doesn't really affect anything. And so to have something to move 20 miles a year is a lot. I mean, there might be something to that with this Adam and Eve book. I don't know. And if this is true, dude, if the Adam and Eve book hypothesis theory is true, that is a catastrophic event that would absolutely lead humanity to just completely go inside out. I mean, completely go inside out. I mean, could you imagine a shift that was so sudden? You talk about these ancient tsunamis, you talk about a global flood. If you had North America suddenly shift, right, and move to the left 100 miles, let's just say, just quick, like just like that. Could you imagine, like, if it's like being in a bathtub, like what kind of like tidal wave that would create? And it wouldn't just be North America, it would be other land masses doing the exact same thing into the ocean, through the ocean. It would create massive tidal waves. And you talk about a lot of these ancient stories from these ancient cultures, when they do talk about the flood, they talk about waters that engulf the mountains. Waters that engulf the mountains. You know what I mean? And so it's like, yeah, and it would be quick, fast, and in a hurry, like sudden. It wouldn't be like the glacial melt. I mean, it would be sudden, dramatic, catastrophic, and immediate. You know, did you see that freaking earthquake that just hit India in China? Did you see the videos from the freaking, like, the people that are getting smoked by that giant flood that's coming through that valley? And that's not even, that's not biblical.
Yeah, that tsunami.
It's catastrophic for the people living there. Mm-hmm. It's catastrophic for the people who live there. It probably killed thousands and thousands of people. You can see it in the videos, the people running, and you're like, those poor fuckers, like they're not, and then they just get engulfed. Like, it's all over Facebook, Instagram, you know, all the different social media places, dude. I mean, that shit is, I mean, that just gives you a tiny taste, bro. That is the tiniest of tiny tastes that we're talking about here. Now, you know, if you're out there, the Adam and Eve book, like I said, it is a wild read. It's really interesting, and it absolutely was classified by the United States government up until really, really recently. And it absolutely has stuff that's redacted in the book that we can't read. And when you read the book, you can tell. You can tell in certain segments that there was stuff like redacted out of that book. Now, why would they classify that book, and why would they redact certain sections of it? I don't know. And the you know, the fact that the freaking the poles are moving this fast, dude. Anyway, that shit's scary. But that's as much as I have from the Adam and Eve book. That's as much as I have from that freaking hypothesis. So we'll just move on from that. If you're out there, you can research that yourself or ask a question on Patreon. Patreon, Joel. Get on there, ask us a question on Patreon, bro. We'll respond. I'll say your name, and we'll do it on the episode. You know what I mean? Okay. Now, the deck of the Mikhail Lomonosov. It's Russian. It's a boat in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. 1957. The middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, approximately 60 miles north of the Azores, like mainland mountains. 60 miles north of that. A Soviet research vessel called the Mikhail Lomonosov is conducting a routine oceanographic survey of the mid-Atlantic ridge, which is the Azores right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. The chief scientist on board is a woman named Maria Klenova. Maria Klenova. She's one of the kind of like a pioneer of Soviet geology, maritime geology, founding member of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, Oceanographic Division. She is meticulous, well-known, very, very thorough, apparently. All right. She's not looking for Atlantis. She's not out there looking for Atlantis. That's not what these people were doing. That's not what they were doing. Okay. She's looking for standard geographical samples of the North Atlantic seafloor for the Academy's ongoing survey program, for a survey program of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. That's what they're looking for. Her crew lowers a device to the seafloor, 6,000 feet down, dude. That's pretty far down, dude. 6,000 feet down. This is interesting and kind of makes me really, really curious about the Adam and Eve hypothesis in that Adam and Eve book. Okay. Almost 2 kilometers below the ocean surface. The device returns with a sample. Okay. When Klenova examines the sample back in the shipboard laboratory, she's puzzled. She's wildly puzzled. The rock is basaltic, which is expected. That's not unexpected. Okay. Because the Mid-Atlantic Trench Ridge is a volcanic zone, and basalt is like a volcanic rock. So it's a basaltic rock. However, the surface texture of the rock is completely wrong, and should not exist this way. Okay. It shows signs of weathering that, according to every established principle of geology, could only have occurred through prolonged exposure to atmospheric conditions, not water conditions, atmospheric conditions, which means that rock had to have been above water, and all the rocks around it as well had to have been above water. Okay. Klenova publishes her findings in the Soviet oceanographic literature. Her conclusion, she states it plainly. She doesn't try to sugarcoat it in any way. The rock samples recovered from 6,000 feet below the surface, 16 miles north of the Azores, show weathering patterns that require atmospheric pressure to be present, atmospheric pressure, which means that the seafloor at that location was above water at some point in the geological recent past. The recent past, Joel, not 50 million years ago, not 100 million years ago. The only way that this, I guess, pings this way is if it's more recent. Go ahead, bud.
It reminds me a little bit of the Sphinx and the rain erosion on the Sphinx and all the stuff like that, like when is it just an anomaly or is it an indication of what science has taught us and what we know as far as like with erosion and what it looks like, a lot of people will just call it an anomaly or find a way to, and I get it. I mean, that is science. You find a way to prove something or disprove something. But yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Well, also, according to science, you use a scientific method and you get the outcomes you get. And you have those outcomes are what you stick with, right? Think about the footprints in New Mexico. It's like, why is that so challenged when the scientific method is correctly used on those footprints and it's used repeatedly? And it's still challenged. And so it's kind of like this stuff. Like they took a bunch of samples from those deals and they all came back is basically they came back with the same conclusions with them that it had to have been. And it was recently, not like I said, not like during Pangea. You know what I mean? Not like when everything was connected and it was a shit ton long time before that and like everything else, but like super duper recent. The recent past. That's what it had to be with all of this stuff. Basically, the recent past with the rock stuff. Okay. The Western academic response to Klenova's findings in 1957 and in the decades since has been to file it under, quote, Soviet science of the Cold War era, end quote, which is interesting, and largely just ignore it. That's what they usually do, right? Especially with a lot of these findings and stuff. A lot of the stuff that we find, like the megalithic structures, like all the parallel inventions that we were talking about, like they kind of just eventually they come up with a term for it and they just ignore it from that point on, which is what they've basically done. But her data is on the record for sure. Her samples still exist in the archives of what is now the Russian Academy of Sciences. It's been retested and confirmed, and subsequent expeditions have recovered similar findings, bro. So it's not just her expeditions since then, because of what she basically found. They've done more samples and their findings are basically the same. Okay. Fossils on top of the Azores seamounts that are dramatically younger than the seamounts themselves. Sand deposits on the abysmal plain south of the Azores that appear to have formed in shallow water conditions as well. Okay. So, we'll go into a little bit more of what that means. All right. The Azores Plateau, the triangular oceanic platform on which the current Azores Islands and are the highest peaks, basically. It covers approximately 400,000 square kilometers, like we said. It's one of the largest oceanic plateaus in the Atlantic, or really in the world. And there is a body of geological evidence, some of it disputed, most of it not, suggesting that substantial portions of it were above sea level at the end of the last ice age. So at the end of the last ice age, which would have been at the Younger Dryas event, which was basically 10 to 12,000 years ago, that there was a substantial amount of the Azores that were above freaking sea level. Okay. We're going to walk through the ancient world, what the ancient world remembered about the large island civilization in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That's what we're going to walk through here. A civilization the Greeks called Atlantis, a civilization the Egyptians recorded in stone through hieroglyphs and stuff, a civilization that at least 7 independent ancient sources, not just Plato, like we said, describe, a civilization whose sudden violent end in the 12th century BC-ish may have set in motion a specific historical event where we've been trying to explain for the last 150 years. Basically, the appearance of the Sea Peoples, the Naval Confederation for the Atlantic that helped end the Bronze Age as well. We're going to look at where that civilization may have been, the Atlanteans, because the Azores hypothesis, contrary to what like your Wikipedia page will tell you, it's not a fringe position. It's not a fringe position anymore. Most of this stuff isn't. It's one of several serious geographical candidates, basically supported by evidence, by ancient testimony, and by the pattern of the Sea People migration itself. Okay. All right. All the sources, not just Plato, all the sources. All right. The framing that Plato invented Atlantis is like a philosophical fiction to illustrate his political theories is repeated so consistently that most listeners have never heard the actual scholarly record, and from other sources as well. Most people just say it's just like the allegory of the cave. It's a fiction. It's like, used to promote some kind of story or lesson or ideal or something like that. All right. The record shows that at least 7 independent ancient sources, like we said, described an ancient and Atlantic island civilization. Sources that predate Plato, sources that postdate Plato, but cite different traditions, and sources that offer geographic and historic details Plato never even mentioned. Okay. It's kind of where we dismantle the Plato made it up thing. Okay, that's what we're kind of going to dismantle right now. Okay, first one. Hellanicus of Lesbos. Hellanicus of Lesbos was a Greek logographer. Now, a logographer from Greece was a speech writer. It was somebody who wrote speeches for people that needed to make speeches. All right. He lived approximately 490 to 405 BC. He died when Plato was in his mid-20s. So this is actually an earlier account than Plato's account. Before Plato had written any of his dialogues, and Hellanicus wrote a work titled Atlantis or Atlantis. So like Atlantis rather than just TS. In some references, that is now lost to us. This work has been cited numerous times. We don't actually have a record of it, but it's been cited historically through other ancient works. Okay, it'd be like me citing a source in a paper I write, and then something happens and that source becomes unavailable. All right, that's basically what this is. All right. The mainstream position on Hellanicus Atlantis is that the work was about the daughters of the Titan Atlas, and that it is therefore unrelated to the Atlantis of Plato. Okay, it's a possibility. It is also possibly the case that Plato was drawing on Hellanicus' earlier work, and that the tradition of an island named Atlantis, associated with the mythology of the Titan Atlas, existed in Greek tradition before Plato even wrote a single word. So before Plato ever wrote a word, there was already a mythology of Atlantis, Atlas, the Titans, like everything going on there kind of in the Atlantic Ocean, something weird. All right. That tradition had existed for a while before that, apparently, which means the Atlantic tradition, like we said, in some form predates Plato for sure by a lot. Plato may have added his own philosophical and political framing to it, but the underlying tradition of the Atlantic island named for Atlas was already circulating among like Greek scholars in the 5th century BC. So during Plato's time, this stuff was already widely circulated, whether it was Atlas or Atlantis or whatever it was. Okay, so that's kind of the first crack in the Plato invented it theory. All right, the Egyptian source Plato explicitly cites. All right, Plato does not present Atlantis as his own invention in his story. He does not say it's his own invention, right? In the Timaeus, now that's what I talked about before. The Timaeus is Plato's like most famous work about science, physics, like in the creation of the universe. So in his Timaeus, he explicitly attributes the story to Egyptian priestly sources. That's where he says he got the story from. The narrative chain, as Plato presents it, an Egyptian priest at the temple of Nei in the city of Sais told the story to an Athenian lawgiver named Solon. And a lot of people have heard this. During Solon's visit to Egypt in the early 6th century BC, Solon told the story to his relative Dropides. Okay, Dropides told it to his son Critias the elder. Critias the elder told it to his grandson Critias the younger, who is the character narrating the story in Plato's dialogue. That's kind of a lot to keep up with. But that's basically, your chain right there of where it comes from. All right. The Egyptian priests, according to Plato, showing Solon the columns in the temple of Nei on which the Atlantis story was inscribed in hieroglyphs. So Solon was shown these hieroglyphs by the Egyptian priests, basically like their historical accounts. All right. The specific reference to hieroglyphic inscription is not incidental. It's not incidental. Plato is telling us that his source is not an oral Greek tradition. His source is written Egyptian temple records. It's written in the Egyptian temple records themselves. In other words, so it couldn't have been made up, right? All right. Crucial information. Crantor of Soli, who lived from approximately 335 to 275 BC, was the first commentator on Plato's Timaeus. Okay. Crantor claimed, according to the later commentator Proclus, that he personally traveled to Egypt and saw the columns in the temple. That he traveled there and saw the columns in the temple. All right. And that the columns did, in fact, record the history of Atlantis exactly as Plato had described. Crantor's testimony is preserved in commentary on the Timaeus, which is, like I said, the Plato's work. So this guy, he's one of the earliest scholars of Plato, traveled to Egypt specifically to verify Plato's Egyptian source. That's what this guy did. He wasn't sure about the source, so he traveled to Egypt on his own to verify those hieroglyphs. Okay, saw that he believed to be the same columns that Plato had referenced and confirmed the account. All right, his testimony is preserved in the historical record as well, which is why we're able to find it. All right, now another one. Diodorus Siculus, an independent tradition. All right. He was a Greek historian, this guy who lived in the 1st century BC in the reign of Julius Caesar. So this guy was around when Julius Caesar was around, living at that time. He has a 40-volume history. It's called the Bibliotheca Historica. Is one of the most important surviving Greek historical works. That's the name of his work. He describes an Atlantic island civilization in the book. And book 3 specifically of that work, he describes an Atlantic island civilization in book 3 of that work. Critically, his account differs from Plato's in specific ways that indicate he is not depending on Plato as his source, which is important. He has a different source. Okay. Now, Atlas is a great astrological king who names the region and the sea after himself, Atlas. Plato's Atlas is the son of Poseidon and the first king of Atlantis. All right. Some of this is hard to keep up with, bro. It's a lot of information because now we're talking about like genealogies a little bit. Before we were talking about like how the history, right, of Egyptian, like, I guess you'd say the folklore or like what the priest told started to pass it way down. Now this is like a genealogy. So Diodorus refers to the islands as still existing, or at least in its inhabitants as still traceable. So it's still traceable during his time. Plato says the island was destroyed, where Diodorus reports that basically the large island of the Atlantic beyond the Pillars of Hercules, several days sail from the coast of Africa, is still discoverable. So there's some different stuff there, right? Like today, if you think about the Azores, like they're still there. It's an island chain, kind of like Hawaii, right? And then underneath it, there's a whole bunch more going on. And that's kind of what he's saying. All right. Divergences of Plato indicate that Diodorus was working from independent source material, not Plato's source material. All right. Navigational records, which we know existed and which we know were substantial. There were substantial navigational records at the time. From basically people called the Phoenicians. All right. They were like considered to be like the greatest Mediterranean naval power of the ancient world, kind of, is who these people were considered. And they had extensive records, naval records. They circumnavigated Africa, according to Herodotus. Herodotus is a really ancient historian who was really prominent in a lot of this stuff. They may have even reached North America. Like there's reports that this Mediterranean naval power of the ancient world, the Phoenicians, might have even made it to North America, which is pretty wild. They certainly had records of Atlantic navigation that haven't survived to us, and that Diodorus, writing 800 years later, had access to. Okay. Once again, the source material that we don't have access to now. All right. If you think about the burning of if you think about like the Library of Alexandria, the libraries in Jerusalem, like the other one you were talking about, Joel, like a couple of weeks ago. It's like there's always these, you start citing sources that don't exist anymore. They're so ancient they haven't really been discovered, and that's a lot of what this is. Like we're like a lot of these people are citing sources that we don't actually have access to anymore, or maybe we will someday, and we just haven't really found them. You know? Okay. So
Well,
Aristotle.
and
Aristotle was Plato's. Oh, go ahead, bud.
well, and just like all the things that like there was speculation of a grand city being in the Amazon, which LiDAR is starting to prove. And there's a lot of cities in the Amazon. Knowing which one is the grand city is the question now. And then, like in the Sahara, they just found some mummified remains of, I think it was a daughter and a woman, and they were like 4,000 years old, and they tested the DNA, and it doesn't come up with any like lineage of DNA. So it's another, like right now they're classifying it as a Saharan DNA because it doesn't match anything else, and there's a lot of speculation that the Sahara um there's a lot hiding underneath that sand as well. So yeah, it's kind of funny
We talked about
when
that
people
too.
speak about these things as written off as myths, and so it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's super interesting, dude. Your DNA stuff was really cool, like the ghost DNA and like all that kind of stuff from the last episode. That was really, really interesting, dude. Like super interesting. Okay. Aristotle, Plato's own student. All right. He wrote of a large island in the Atlantic that the Carthaginians knew as Antilia. Antilia. All right. The name notably makes semantic sense in the Portuguese, like as Antilia. Antilia. Okay. And it means before island or against island. That's what that word means. All right. The Carthaginian knowledge of the Atlantic island is confirmed by Aristotle, who had every incentive to be skeptical of his teacher's more speculative claims, basically, and who instead collaborated the underlying tradition using different terminology and different sources. So Aristotle tried to dig deep into this Atlantis stuff. All right. Plutarch, 1st century CE, mentions the name of 2 Atlantean figures that do not appear in Plato's account. Plutarch, suggesting that he had access to an independent tradition. Okay. He references an island as part of a standard geographic knowledge among educated Greeks, not as a novelty. So he's basically, during his time, he's pretty much saying that this was common knowledge. This was like, people knew about this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, we don't know about it today and we kind of scoff at it today, but at his time, it was common knowledge. You know what I mean? All right. The next one, Marcellus and the Aethiopica. The Aethiopica. All right. This is the source that most directly supports like the Azores hypothesis. The Azores hypothesis, the hypothesis I'm talking about. All right. When it comes to that possibly being Atlantis. All right. So Marcellus, an ancient historian whose work was called the Antiopicia, is now lost again, but preserved in fragments. There are fragments that have been discovered, not the whole thing, not in entirety. And a lot of these stories, dude, if you think about the stories from the Bible, if you think about the stories from like the Epic of Gilgamesh, think about like when it comes to like the Anunnaki and the stories of like the sages in India and all this stuff, dude, it's all fragments. Like we don't have the full script for like any of this stuff. You know what I mean? Like there's even Noah's flood story, like there's big pieces that are missing of it. And in the flood story from Samaria, there's still big pieces that are missing from it. Like you have fragmentary evidence. You don't have the whole. It's not like picking up a book today. Like I can pick up this book right here and I can just read it and I have everything in it, right? Well, it's like, dude, in 1,000 years, if this book is somehow preserved, it's like there's going to be fragments left, but not the whole entire thing. And that's kind of the idea with that. Like a lot of this stuff is just it's fragmented, like understanding of thing. Okay. According to Marcellus, is quoted by Proclus in his commentary on Plato's Timaeus. Remember, the Timaeus is what Plato wrote based on like what he thought the universe was scientifically. There were 7 islands in the outer sea sacred to Persephone. All right. And some of the other Greek gods, such as like Pluto, Ammon, and Poseidon. Now, Persephone was Zeus's daughter. She's the Greek goddess of spring vegetation, and she's also the queen of the underworld. So according to tradition, Hades basically like kidnapped her. She went down to Hades. Like he kidnapped her, pulled her down there. She didn't want to stay down there, but there was something about eating a pomegranate, which is kind of like eating the apple. And because she ate that pomegranate, there was something about that to where she didn't have to stay in Hades the whole time, but she had to like be there like most of the time. You know what I mean? Just kind of permanently, like most of the time. Like eating that pomegranate did something to where she wasn't able to just escape him anymore. Like she had to like deal with him for whatever the heck that means. Okay. All the inhabitants of the largest of these islands preserved from their ancestors the memory of an exceedingly large island of Atlantis, which had for a long time exercised domination or dominion over all the smaller islands of the Atlantic. Okay. This is like ancient Greek tradition. What is he telling us? The islands in the Atlantic were not empty of testimony. Their inhabitants in the 1st or 2nd century CE. So this is not BC, 1st or 2nd century CE, like the people that lived on those islands, basically the Azores, when Marcellus was writing, still preserved an ancestral memory that they had once been part of or subject to a much larger Atlantic civilization called Atlantis. The civilization was gone, but its memory persisted among the island population who had survived, right? It's kind of like you have the Hopi talking about the ant people. You know what I mean? Like they're the descendants of the ant people, you know, or you have like in South America where you'd have the Aztecs and the Olmecs and the Mayans talking about being the descendants of the gods who built all the temples down there, you know, like these people in 1st or 2nd century CE were freaking saying that they were the descendants of like a mightier race that was, or people or society or culture that was there that no longer exists today. That's pretty freaking interesting, dude. Marcellus also claims that the survivors of the sinking of Atlantis migrated to Western Europe. That's also a claim that he makes. This is kind of the connection to the sea peoples, which we will develop like a little bit later. We're not going to talk necessarily about that now, but it's going to come in later. Okay. So another ancient historian tells almost the same story. This dude is name is Timagenes. Okay, he's an ancient historian. He tells basically the same story, except this is different. This kind of goes to Doggerland. Okay, he's citing the Druids of Gaul as his sources. So he's basically saying that the Druids of Gaul told him this story. All right, meaning Timagenes is telling us that the Celtic Druids preserved an oral tradition of Atlantic migration, independently of the Greek and Egyptian traditions. Okay. So this tradition goes all the way up into Doggerland, bro. It goes all the way up into Britain and Scotland and those whole areas. All right. And that they attributed the origin of some of the Gaelic tribes to survivors from an island civilization in the Atlantic. So they're even going as far as saying that some of the Gaelic tribes that existed at that time were direct descendants of the people that came from this Atlantean civilization in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which is a super interesting, dude, because that's way far north. Right. I mean, you have this talked about in Greek and Egypt and all these different traditions. And now it's talked about, dude, in the Celtic tradition, literally in the Celtic tradition. Okay. Now, referring to the Celtic tradition, Timagenes was a Greek historian of the 1st century BC, 100 BC. All right, who wrote about the Gauls. His work is preserved in fragmentary form. Again, fragmentary form. It doesn't have the full, we don't have his full stuff. We have his fragmentary of his stuff by a 4th century Roman historian. All right, I'm not even going to say the guy's name. This is a crazy name. All right, Timagenes classified the Gaelic tribes by their origin. According to his account, one of the Gaelic tribes preserved the tradition that they were colonists who had come to Gaul from a remote island in the Atlantic Ocean. Their arrival was, according to their own oral tradition, a consequence of the loss of their homeland. Right? All of these traditions, it's like we were talking about the traditions before the fallen angels and, you know, the ancient knowledge across all of the, like the entire earth and all the different peoples. Like this is basically kind of that same thing. All right. This is like, it's saying that they were literally like they're in Doggerland in the north because their island, like their historic island that they had in it, like in the Atlantic, had been destroyed, and that's why they came there. So that's another like parallel invention kind of thing, right? Where we talk about like the best way that academia can describe it is basically parallel invention, saying that all these people are saying the same stuff about some freaking people in the Atlantic Ocean, some society, some big landmass, the land between the lands, like that was out there. And you have it talking about it. You have these ancient sources that go all the way from Doggerland in the north, like above Gaul, and then Britain, all the way down like through the Mediterranean where Greece is, and then all the way down into Egypt. Right? It's a completely independent line of testimony, not Greek, not Egyptian. It's Celtic, preserved orally by the Druids for centuries before Timagenes even recorded it down. Obviously, these stories are always passed by the word of mouth for however long they're passed by the word of mouth before somebody freaking writes it down. All right. The Celts of Gaul told a story about their own origins that trace part of their ancestry to survivors from an Atlantic island civilization. Okay. So now we're going to count them a little. We're going to count and walk it through, because this is the moment where the mainstream framing has to face the actual evidence of what we're talking about here. All right. You have Hellanicus of Lesbos, before Plato, wrote a work titled Atlantis. This was the guy before Plato, wrote a work titled Atlantis. That's number one. Number two, Plato's stated Egyptian source, the priests of the temple of Neas and Sais with columns inscribed in hieroglyphs detailing the fall of Atlantis. That's number two. Number three, Cantor of Soli, personally verifying Plato's Egyptian source shortly after Plato's death. That's the guy we talked about where Plato dies, right? He goes to Egypt himself to verify Plato's sources, and he sees the hieroglyphs for himself, detailing the destruction of Atlantis. All right. Number four, Diodorus Siculus, with a different genealogy and independent sources. We talked about that guy. Five, Aristotle. Aristotle was Plato's student. He was referencing Carthaginian knowledge of the Atlantic island called Atlantia. Remember, he dug more into the story of Atlantis. Six, Plutarch, with names of Atlantean figures not in Plato, which meant he would have had different sources outside of Plato's sources. All right, which is really interesting, and that's actually really important that he has different sources outside of Plato's sources. All right. Seven, Marcellus, describing 7 islands whose inhabitants remembered ancestral connection to Atlantis. Remember, we talked about that ancestral memory, right? Kind of like the Hopi and all these different people that are like our great times 1,000 grandfathers, did this and that and the other thing. That's what they're talking about. These are the people that were living in the Azores. All right. 8, Timagenes, preserving the Druid Celtic tradition of Gaelic tribes who descended from Atlantic islanders. That's the one we had just talked about before, right? That's a really interesting one. And then you have Proclus, the 5th century commentator, preserving multiple independent traditions, diving into the same kind of. Those are 9 ancient sources, bro. 9 ancient sources. 8 more than just what Plato was talking about, spanning at least 800 years, from Hellanicus in the 5th century BC to Proclus in the 5th century CE. That's almost 1,000 years of tradition, right? Of people investigating whatever the hell Atlantis is. It's written in Greek, Latin, in the case of the Egyptian and Druid traditions, Plato and Timagenes site, preserved in Egyptian hieroglyphs and Celtic oral tradition as well. All right, so it's Greek, Latin, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Celtic tradition. It's in those 4 different languages, cultures, traditions. The mainstream tradition that Atlantis is, quote, that thing Plato made up, end quote, is not the position the ancient world took. The ancient world did not take that position. They took this stuff very, very seriously. All right? The ancient world took Atlantis super seriously. Multiple independent scholars from multiple different traditions all engaged with the question, where was it? Who lived there? What happened to it? How did the survivors migrate? These are people from thousands of years ago, dude. Thousands of years ago, investigating this exact same thing we're talking about today in 2026 on this freaking podcast, Black Army Radio, bro. We're part of that tradition now. Pretty freaking cool. All right. Modern skepticism about Atlantis is a specifically modern position. This is a modern position. It's not a historic position, okay? It is not the position of the ancient historians who wrote when the memory of the event was closer at hand and more talked about and more acceptable. Okay. It's only skeptical. It's like today, is it are people skeptical about it? Because back in those days, those historians thousands of years ago, like all these people we're talking about now, they weren't skeptical about it. They were describing it. You know what I mean? They were describing everything that they had freaking heard about it, listened about it, and all these different cultures, all these different languages, you know, and in regions that are freaking far away from each other, bro. I mean, goddamn, like Doggerland or, you know, Britain, Ireland, that area is pretty freaking far from Egypt. That's pretty freaking far from Egypt. You know what I'm saying? And pretty far from Greece. And so it's really crazy that tradition, that oral tradition exists there. Go ahead, bud.
And some of the stuff like I looked up in the research of DNA, some of like the DNA models don't fit with some of these theories. But when you talk about ancient DNA, you have to have conditions just right to find the DNA. And then two, just like that Sahara mummies that they found. And this was real recent. I saw this after I did my research on the DNA from last episode. So this was in the last few days I saw this. With no DNA that matches any modern human as far as it's human DNA, but they can't tell its lineage. It's not Mediterranean. It's not this. It's not that. And then like with all the advances that we have with the DNA when it comes to the land bridge theory, showing that Southeast Asians were probably taking boats. Polynesians are taking boats long before we ever thought they were. So this is all stuff that's happened in the last like 5-10 years. So the more stuff we find, I think the closer we are to have some sort of breakthrough of like, oh, whether it's the cities in the Amazon or the Sahara or the Atlantis or all fucking three of them, you know, like I think the more we dig, the more we find, the older things get, and our old learnings of history are proven wrong time and time again. So I think it's awesome.
It is awesome, dude. And it's way more detailed than most people understand. You know what I mean? Like this tradition anyway. Like it expands. It's like geography is pretty expansive. Separate languages, separate cultures, separate peoples entirely. Like even different people with different skin colors, right? If you think about the people of the north, like up there by Doggerland, like they don't, you know, physically they barely resemble the people in Egypt. You know what I mean? I mean, it's this tradition transcends like race, language, culture, society, geography, like all this stuff. And so there's something interesting to it there. All right, the Sea Peoples and the Bronze Age collapse. The Sea Peoples. All right, we turn to the historical event that has puzzled Mediterranean archaeologists for a century and a half, because if Atlantis was destroyed and its survivors scattered all over the world, basically, is a lot of these historical figures we're talking about both tell us, those survivors should show up somewhere on the historical record, right? And they may have. All right, in the 12th century BC, exactly as one would expect, if the Mid-Atlantic civilization suffered geological catastrophe and as people took to their ships and headed east, there would be records of this, and it seems like there is. Okay, what the Bronze Age collapse really was. The Bronze Age collapse is something people have heard about, but they probably don't actually know that much about. It's one of the greatest mysteries in ancient history. It really is. A lot of people don't necessarily understand how this happened, why it happened between roughly 1200 BC and 1150 BC. So we're only talking 50 years. I mean, like, just like the blink of an eye in history, right? Essentially, every single major civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East collapsed. They all collapsed basically within that 50-year mark. It's pretty crazy. All right, you have the Mycenaean palace culture of Greece was completely gone. The Hittite empire of Anatolia was gone. The Kassite Babylonian dynasty was shattered during that time. The Ergatic tradition city of the Levant is kind of in the Middle East area, was burned to the ground and it was destroyed. The Egyptian New Kingdom was nearly overthrown, but it wasn't overthrown, but it was really, really close, and it was dramatically, wildly weakened. Okay. It's the most complete civilizational collapse, like in what we have in recorded history, because it expands a lot of geography and a lot of areas and a lot of different peoples. kind of wild how it happened. Literally until basically the fall of the Western Roman Empire, like 1,000 years later. So like 1,000 years later, that's when like Rome kind of like really collapsed and like all that stuff started to happen. All right. Trade networks that had connected the entire Mediterranean and Near East for centuries were completely shattered during this time. Writing systems were entirely lost. A lot of these ancient sources we're talking about that are cited that we don't have access to, a lot of that source material was lost during this time as well. Cities were burned and never rebuilt. So if you think about all the libraries and a lot of those cities, right? Because every one of these city states and like these kind of things, like they all have their own recorded histories. They have the recorded histories of their people. They have recorded histories of the people that came before them. It's just like us. There are people just like us. And so they were doing a lot of the same thing, but a lot of their library structures and histories had been burned and destroyed intentionally somehow, like during this Bronze Age collapse thing. The archaeological record shows a dramatic drop in population. So there was a whole bunch of humans that died during this as well. All right. And like material sophistication and interconnectedness of the world kind of started to really slip away and break contact, at least, you know, in the Mediterranean area. All right. The causes are contested. Modern archaeology analysis identifies multiple contributing factors. They talk about climate change. They talk about drought. They talk about earthquakes, internal social upheaval, right? Like civil war, revolution, things like that. But crucially, the appearance of a naval confederation the Egyptians called in their own inscriptions the peoples of the sea or the sea peoples kind of arrived at this exact same time. All right. What the Egyptians actually wrote about the sea peoples, because they kind of seem to have more records of them than anybody else. All right, the best surviving records of the sea peoples come from Egyptian sources, like we said, because Egypt was their primary target. Egypt is one of the few civilizations that survived the encounter intact enough to leave a written record, because apparently, like a lot of these other civilizations, if this happened during the Bronze Age collapse, were fucking wiped out by whoever these sea peoples were, supposedly. Okay. Now, there is something called the Merneptah stele. It's erected by Pharaoh Meneptah around 1200 BC. Right? It's the earliest surviving Egyptian text that refers to the sea peoples by name. So 1200 BC. Okay. That's the earliest record we have of Egypt describing the sea peoples. It records his defeat of a sea people confederation that included, a whole bunch of different kinds of people. They describe them as coming, in the Egyptian phrase, from the countries of the sea, end quote. They're saying that they came from the countries of the sea. That's where they came from. The inscription elaborates that the sea peoples came in their warships. They had allied with the Libyans, whoever the Libyans were. Their attack was substantial enough that like the victory over them was commemorated as one of the greatest achievements of his entire reign. All right. And that's why they have that huge depiction of it in like 1200 BC of like, and the record, supposed record of that victory. Okay. But the definitive Egyptian record of the sea peoples comes from the reign also of Ramses III as well, half a century later. So 50 years later, there is a temple of Ramses III, preserves an extensive relief and inscription describing a great battle that took place in 1178 BC, in which Ramses III defeated a massive sea people invasion by both land and sea. So here you have like kind of two Egyptian kings. They're back to back, and they're basically both saying that they defeated the sea peoples, but it was like some massive crazy war or something, and they're saying that they won it. Both of these kings. Now, whether that's
Right.
they're plagiarizing each other or Ramses is plagiarizing Merneptah, the other guy's name is Merneptah, I don't know. Like it's pretty interesting. You know what I mean? And so, but you know, anyway, it's just an interesting thing. Now, I don't know whether or not these, is Ramses copying Merneptah, or was there actually like this, like an ongoing 200-year, or 100-year, basically 100-year, just consistent engagement where these people, where the sea peoples, like the remnants, kind of like we were talking about the people of the Azores that said they were the descendants, you know what I mean, of the Atlanteans. If it was in 1200 BC, it's like, are these people kind of like what's left, like the civilization that was left when the Azores kind of became the Azores, and there were still people there that somehow survived it, they got reduced to nothing. They started to rebuild everything, like as people will do. And it's like, is that who the sea people were? You know what I mean? Kind of the remnants of whatever Atlantis was. That's kind of what I think. But I mean, I don't know. Yeah. And then in the Egyptians' own words, they're basically saying the sea peoples were from islands in the Atlantic. And all at once the lands were removed and scattered in a fray. That's another thing they say. They say the Egyptians say that, quote, all at once the lands, and they're talking about the lands of the Atlantic, were removed and scattered in a fray. All right. A wholesale, they're basically describing a wholesale displacement of populations from their island homelands, basically saying that whoever these sea peoples were, their freaking homelands had been completely destroyed, whenever they were destroyed. But they also detail the fact that these sea people were freaking survivors of some kind of destroyed society. All right. The question that mainstream archaeology has been unable to definitively answer for 150 years, since the French Egyptologist Emmanuel de Rogue coined the term sea peoples. He was the first guy to actually do that, and this was in 1855, is where did they come from? Who freaking were they really? The mainstream theories, the sea peoples were displaced populations from various Mediterranean regions. Okay, that's kind of the mainstream thing. Driven by drought and famine to migrate in mass, okay, and then into all these different regions, like we talked about, and then had wars with all of these different peoples. Okay, they're kind of saying that there was some kind of, they're basically saying there was a bunch of different peoples from the Mediterranean. They had some kind of, something go wrong, whether it was a drought or archaeological, think about like agriculture, some kind of agricultural famine or something, and then they were forced to like attack their neighbors and try to steal their shit. Basically, that's kind of what the mainstream position is on who the sea peoples were. All right. Yeah, and so I'll move on from that. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail. So, okay, the alternative hypothesis. All right, some component of the sea peoples originated from further west in the Mediterranean, from islands or coastal regions in the Atlantic, which is far more how it's described. From populations that had experienced catastrophic loss of their homeland and had taken to their ships and mass east migration, seeking new lands to settle. That's kind of the alternative hypothesis, the hypothesis that I pretty much go with, okay? The mainstream's not going to go down easily when it comes to this, for sure. But the alternative hypothesis explains details mainstream theories cannot, for sure. It explains the coherent naval organization. It explains the sophisticated ship designs. It explains the reference to the islands in the Atlantic Ocean. It explains the sudden appearance and historical record of the sea peoples, the sudden appearance and the fact that they were very, very, very powerful. And it explains why Marcellus, writing centuries later but drawing on ancient sources, explicitly stated that the survivors of Atlantis migrated eastward to Western Europe. So the alternative hypothesis answers a hell of a lot more questions about what all these people were saying, who these people were, where they came from, what they were doing, than mainstream academia, like, for sure. All right. The naval technology detail. Okay. This gets skipped a lot. All right. It becomes significant when you take the Atlantic origin theory hypothesis seriously, which is what we're doing. The sea people's warships is depicted on what's called the Medinet Habu reliefs. Medinet Habu reliefs showed design features that were novel to the Eastern Mediterranean. Okay. Vertical prows and sterns rising to bird-headed decorations. Like, they're saying the front and back of the boats were wildly decorative. Kind of like if you think about the Vikings. The Vikings would always have like a dragon or a bird or like something on the front and the back of their ships. Really, really similar to that, but way, way before that. Way, way before that. Broad holes suitable for oceanic voyaging. So really, really wide and broad holes. Basically saying that they were able to travel extensively. Because of how that ship was designed with that. A crow's nest for obviously doing reconnaissance or fighting platform. I mean, depending on how you could use it. And a single mast with a large, super duper large square cell in the middle of it. The ships were not modeled on the Mediterranean gallery designed of the period. So in other words, these ships that are described aren't anything like the ships of the day that everybody else had in the Mediterranean or down in Egypt. It was completely different than that. They were Yeah, something wildly different than that. Something optimized for extended oceanic voyaging rather than for like coastal travel, right? Because you think about like a lot of those ships, like even if you think about the Viking ships, it's like, yeah, they would have had a hard time going all the way across like the Atlantic Ocean. That's a long voyage. But these ships were a lot wider. Like their hulls were wider, bigger, longer for way more extensive traveling. And nobody else from the Egyptians all the way up to the freaking Brits had anything that like mimicked what these boats were. Also, I could possibly think it might have been something that the Vikings might have modeled it after, right? Because this is Celtic tradition as well. You know what I'm saying? This is Celtic tradition as well, which is Viking country up there too. And so it's like maybe because when you think about like the single mast sail, right? When you think about the fact that the front of the back of the boat is wildly decorative, like super duper decorative, like this is how they're describing the sea peoples, but they predate the Vikings by fucking, thousands of years. And so it seems to me like they might have modeled because the Vikings became so seafaring and so known for seafaring in their boats that I think, in a way they might have modeled after some of that, like some of those ideas. It's pretty freaking interesting. Yeah, and their weapons. So long swords of a type the Egyptians called these swords they describe nuai, two swords. Okay, they're straight bladed, cut and thrust weapons for advanced bronze metallurgy. They had round shields of a design the Egyptians did not previously encounter. Apparently, this is how they describe them. They had body armor of the Aegean bronze type, but in variations the Egyptians had never seen as well. This is actually really interesting, Joel. You might think this is cool. Feathered headdresses that the Egyptians rendered with obvious care in their reliefs. Like these feathered headdresses, they made sure to make them look very, very elaborate in their hieroglyphs. Okay. Headdresses that resembled, according to everything that you look at, the ceremonial regalia depicted and much later in the Americas, the Native Americans. So if you think about like this right here, right? See that? They're basically describing it like that. They're basically saying that the freaking Atlanteans or the sea people had headdresses that resembled Native Americans in the Americas, like big, huge headdresses, like full of feathers and like wildly decorative. And most closely, when you look at it, like that we can point to is Native Americans. Like that's what it looked like. It looked just like Native American headdresses, right, which I think is a pretty cool, interesting caveat, kind of side note to this whole thing. The sea peoples arrived in the Eastern Mediterranean with a technological and a cultural package that the Egyptians had no prior familiarity with, or anybody else for that matter. They hadn't seen anything like this, which is what you would expect if they came from an origin region the Egyptians had never previously interacted with. Obviously, they had never seen these peoples before. All right, the date matters. The temporal, the correspondence that ties all this stuff together, right? Plato's Egyptian source, the priests at the temple of Nia, stated to Solon that the destruction of Atlantis occurred 9,000 years before their time. This is kind of where we have an interesting. This is where the chronology is kind of interesting here. We can draw some of our own conclusions with this. So the priests of the temple of Nia stated to Solon that the destruction of Atlantis occurred 9,000 years before their time. All right. Solon visited Egypt around 590 BC. 9,000 years before that places the destruction of Atlantis around 9,600 BC. 9,600 BC. All right. There is an alternative reading to this, though. Okay. Which some scholars have argued. Not all of them, but some. There is like some argument over how Egyptians kind of like catalog time when it came to this. They're saying the Egyptian priestly year was different from the Greek year. The Egyptian priestly year in their sacred calendar was, in some interpretations, these are just some interpretations, was a lunar month rather than a year. 9,000 months translates to approximately 750 solar years. 750 years before Solon places the destruction at approximately 1340 BC. So 750 years before that, if that's an accurate reading of time, which is within 150 years of the beginning of the sea people's migrations. So I think there's going to be two things correct here at once. And I'm going to get to it as soon as I finish with this part. Okay, so this is within 200 years of the destruction of Urget, the fall of the Hittite Empire and the near collapse of Egypt itself and the collapse of the entire Bronze Age, all those civilizations. Okay. So if you take the calendar date as if when I talk about it being like the lunar months rather than the years, that date corresponds pretty much exactly with the fall of the Bronze Age and all of those civilizations. All right. The Egyptian priestly source may have been telling Solon a story that was in their sacred calendar 4 to 5 centuries old at the time of the telling. 4 to 5 centuries old at the time of the telling, not 90 centuries old, not 10,000-ish BC. And the events it described, the destruction of a naval civilization and the scattering of its survivors, correspond exactly in that reading to what the Egyptians themselves witnessed and recorded in their own time, right? When they fought the sea peoples. Now, this is what I think, Joel. You can tell me what you think. I think during the Ice Age, when the Younger Dryas hit, for sure, without question, there would have been, if that big landmass, the Mid-Atlantic, ridge, would have been, a lot of it would have been above sea level. We know a lot of it was above sea level. They have found a lot of rock and stuff to know that it's above sea level, that it was above sea level at some point and for an extended period of time, enough to create atmospheric erosion through like wind, rain, like stuff that is not what you have underwater. I think that was a disaster that probably, if Atlantis was going on and there was the Atlantean people, you think about like Quetzalcoatl going to think about the sages, right? You think about even like the fallen angels, or you could think about like Quetzalcoatl. It's like if there was a really, really advanced civilization, like you could say on par with the United States compared to like hunter-gatherers in the Amazon, we would be considered as gods, right? If we showed up in the Amazon with hunter-gatherers with cell phones, airplanes and helicopters, fucking cars, computers, like weapon systems, like the weapon systems we have today, like sounds like thunder, can kill you from thousands of yards away, blah, 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 blah. We would probably be depicted as gods, for sure, And so it's like, I think that's one event. I think the event with the Younger Dryas, I think there was a catastrophic event that completely destroyed whatever Atlantis was, or those islands were at that time, like 10,000 BC, 9,600 BC. But I also think that there was a civilization that was still able to maintain, because the Azores still exist today, right? They still exist today as a landmass, kind of like Hawaii, except in the middle of the Atlantic. There's 7 different, there's actually 9, but there's 7 inhabited islands. There's 9 islands, but 7 of them are inhabited. And I think these sea peoples were probably whatever was left after a rebuilt civilization. And it could have taken, obviously we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years after the Younger Dryas. But I think that the sea peoples that we're talking about were probably whatever was left of the original Atlanteans.
I mean, when it comes to the Younger Dryas, I think there's more than just Atlantis. I think there was a few thriving civilizations on different continents. And I think if those civilizations were thriving, they probably had some sort of technology from boating, getting across. And I think the ones that survived found the leftovers and groups of people that kind of lost generations of learning and said like, hey, this is how you plant a field. You need to do this to your soil if you want to have good growth here, and to them that was, that was godlike. That was somebody from the sea who came on a boat. And I think I think all of them, all those major supposed civilizations, that whether it was Atlantis or whether it was a big civilization in the Sahara, whether it was the Amazon, I think all those people, when the Younger Dryas hit, the majority of them died. There was some leftovers who were able to survive, and then they spread the knowledge to the people who came out of the Younger Dryas, whether they were living in caves, whether, when we were the Great Reset, I guess. Is kind of my theory.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a whole bunch of things true at once. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I think. I think that there was absolutely a lot more going on than we think there was. Like a lot. I think there was a lot more going on than we think was. I think it was widespread. Yeah. Kind of like if you think about it today, like with the United States, you have Great Britain, the United States, you got France, you got Italy, you got Canada. You got all these functional, Switzerland, you got all these functional societies and government structures where you have education, technology development, invention, like, travel, where you can travel extensively. But then you got to places like you go to places in Africa, you go to places in South America, you go to places in Australia with different peoples in Australia. And you have a completely different standard of living. It's completely different civilizations. They're not inventing stuff. They're still burning witches. Like, there's places in Africa where they still take women and they burn them to death like they're as witches. You know what I mean? Still happening today. The slave trade today is very vast within like third world countries and stuff, and that's still happening. And this is all happening simultaneously with the United States and Great Britain and like all they said, like these more like modern societies. Like, this is all coexisting at the same time on this planet. And then you have everything from, like we said, hunter gatherer all the way to SpaceX. You know what I'm saying? And like, obviously, like, if you think about, like whatever those outfits are that are back engineering UAP stuff, like Skunk Works and those kind of outfits to have those kind of capabilities. Like, obviously not hunter-gatherer. And so I think even at that time, 10, 20,000, 50,000 years ago, whatever, dude, humans have been humans, and we've kind of come and gone over and over and over again through extinction events and like redevelopment. I don't think it's ever been different than that. I think it's always been the case. I think there's always been the case where you've had really advanced societies and civilizations, and then they go out and then you have hunter-gatherers. And it's like, dude, if we had a catastrophic event today, right? And like we were talking about in this in the last episode, and me and you went down to the Amazon and we brought our rifles and our plate carriers and we brought dirt bikes, right? And we brought like our phones and computers and like, give or take, whatever, you pick it, just a whole bunch of shit. You could bring your freaking bow that you have behind you. I mean, imagine, like, they have bows, but they don't have a compound bow. They've never seen anything like that, of what that thing can do. You know what I mean? And it's like, if we were to take all that stuff down there, bro, 100%, if they didn't kill us, you'd be worshipped as gods, for sure. Especially if there had been a massive event where they were going to feel it. Even if you're a hunter-gatherer, like, if there's asteroids or comets that strike the fucking Earth and tsunamis and like all this other stuff, they're still going to see it and feel it. So they know something happened, right? Go ahead, bud.
Well, and if you think about it, depending on how big the reset was or the cataclysm or whatever, and say it's catastrophic and it claims like 90% of mankind, more than that, you go through all that rebuilding and all the guns, all the ammo, and yeah, there's going to be some places where they're stockpiled so high, but say 2,000 years later, when you're set to reset, where it doesn't matter if you have a battery, it doesn't matter if you have a phone, like, you have to let say it's something like the Younger Dryas or something else, where you literally have to let the world cool down for 50 years before you could go back out on the surface again. Like, you're going to be back to those primitive weapons, like when the bullets run out, when the strings on the bows rot out, like, it's not, and maybe there's some places where technology was able to, we have the map to do it and we get there a little quicker. But if it's one of those things where, it would be really interesting, because I think, history goes and shows that, that's why the Clovis thing was forever like the hypothesis, like the Clovis people, like, like history goes to show these ebb and flows of, we're up here and now we're back down. We're up here and now we're back down, and it'd be interesting to see what a modern cataclysm would look like 800 years after it happened.
You're 100% right about everything you're saying, dude. Yeah, you're 100%. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're 100% right about all that, dude, because you're right. I mean, like, if you think about, like, we watch the movies, like these zombie movies, right? What was that fucking zombie movie, that The Walking Dead, lasted forever, right? And that's what it would be like, dude. Right. You'd have these tribal elements of people trying to figure out how to survive. They don't know how to make a car. They don't know how to make a phone. They don't know how to, like, invent the internet again. Like, they're just people being people. And after that time, like, dude, they're gonna survive, and whatever is left of our society now, if you look out your window. But 1,000 years later, when people are still learning how to survive, all that stuff is going to be gone. Like humanity is going to slowly, after that cataclysm, is going to slowly diminish. It's going to keep diminishing. It's going to flatten out somewhere. And then people are going to start inventing stuff and figuring stuff out. And this society will start picking back up again in different parts of the world. You know what I mean? But at first, there's probably going to be 500 years or 1,000 years, no joke, of humans just fucking surviving. Just surviving. Like more than anything else. And then once the bullets are gone, like you said, you're back to using stone tools, bro. You're back to taking a piece of freaking flint and breaking it into an arrowhead and attaching it to a stick and figuring out how to make a bow and arrow or a spear. Like that's what you're back to. Because you're eventually going to get to the point, where all the bullets are gone, dude. You're eventually going to get to the point where all those firearms that are made of metal 1,000 years later are rotted away and scattered to the wind. You will have unless one of them survives in a bog in a freaking, like a lake and somehow fossilizes, you're never going to find it again. You'll never find a rifle 1,000 years from now. Not one fucking rifle would you find. They're made out of plastic and metal. It's gone, bro. Gone. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Completely gone. And so, it's wild, dude. But I think all of those things kind of be correct at once.
And it'll be just like we are, At first we thought like when you go to the copper civilization, that's not really talked about. Like they were using metal tools and metal shit like way before we thought. And we'll see some gun barrel from a musket that somehow survived and a barrel from a Barrett 50 caliber, and it'll be known as like the weapons age, like the projectile age or whatever, like it'll be fucking interesting.
It'd be wild, dude. It'd be a trip. I'll tell you what, but you can kind of see how it all works. The more you study it, the more you can see how it works. Okay. All right. So the Azores hypothesis and the candidate locations, we're going to get into the locations a little bit here. Okay. I personally believe it's the Azores 100%. There was actually a guy who was on, I want to say American Alchemy with Michaels. I think his name is something Michaels. He was actually just on Rogan too, the guy who hosts American Alchemy. But dude, this guy is wildly credentialed, and he actually has a whole bunch of people on American Alchemy that are really credentialed, like NASA people, scientists, congressmen, senators. Like he doesn't have anybody on there that's like a turd that's just talking about shit on the internet. You know what I mean? He's got a guy on there who's an admiral, and retired, and he's literally they've had a pretty good conversation about they're going to send a dive team down into the Azores because he is fully convinced that Atlantis is in the Azores. And I was listening to this thing like screaming to the radio, like, I know, that's where it is. Take me with you. I will write about it. I will give you your academic papers that you can publish. Please take me with you. Because I was sitting there and I was like, dude, I've been thinking that for years, bro. I've been thinking that for years that it's in the Azores. It makes all the sense. It matches everything, all of the ancient records. It's fucking perfect. But anyway, so I was really, really excited when the admiral said that they were going to send a dive team down into the Azores to kind of because we talked about their structures and stuff down there too, which I'm going to talk about a little bit here in a minute. But it's like to try to get some more, intelligence basically of what the hell is going on in the Azores underwater. And so anyway, the geographic question, if Atlantis is real, where was it? The candidate locations are numerous. Some are more defendable than others. We're going to get into it now. So the Azores Plateau is like some of this I'm going to regurgitate is an oceanic platform in the North Atlantic Ocean located at the junction of three tectonic plates. The junction of three tectonic plates, the North American plate, the Eurasian plate, and the African plate all converge there. It is the surface expression of the Azores hotspot, a volcanic upwelling of magma from the Earth's mantle that built the Azores. Okay, that's how it works. The plateau covers approximately 400,000 square kilometers. It's a triangular in shape. It rises significantly above the surrounding what's called abyssal plain. Its crust is between 20 and 30 kilometers thick. That's how thick the crust is for the Azores. Okay, which is unusually thick for oceanic crust and closer to the thickness of continental crust. So, like we were talking about before, when it came to all those rocks that Russian expedition brought up in 1957, right? This crust, the bottom part crust of the Azores, mimics continental crust. It does not mimic stuff that would just be sea bearing the entire of its entire existence. It mimics continental crust. Okay. The current Azores consist of 9 volcanic islands, like we said, of which 7 are the main inhabited ones today. These islands are the highest peaks of the underwater plateau itself. Between them lie numerous submerged seamounts, some of which come within a few hundred meters of the surface, which meant they all would have been exposed during the Ice Age. Numerous mountaintops. Okay. UNESCO own tentative listing for the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Okay, so UNEOS is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. That's what UNESCO's is. Okay, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Its own tentative listing for the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and the Azores acknowledges that many of the seamounts, now submerged hundreds of meters deep, were, and I quote, bro, and I quote, emerged in the past from thousands to millions of years ago, forming islands, end quote. Some of them, according to UNESCO documentation, exhibit flattened tops caused by coastal erosion. These are called guyouts, Guyots, and they are the fossil signature of an island that was once above water and has since subsided or been submerged. This is directly from the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, bro. That directly has big documents specifically investigating the Azores, saying that the Azores were for sure, maybe at various times, above water. Above water. Okay? The atmospheric weathering rocks. The specific evidence that a portion of the Azores Plateau was above sea level in the geologically recent past. The geologically recent past. Okay. You have Maria Klenova's 1957 expedition, which we talked about. We opened this episode with rock samples from 6,000 feet, dude. 6,000 feet, bro. Deep. 60 miles north of the Azores, weathering patterns that could only have been produced by prolonged atmospheric exposure, meaning above water at some point in the geological recent past. Dude, 6,000 feet deep. Explain that one to me. 6,000 feet deep. That makes me think about the Adam and Eve hypothesis that we talked about early in this episode, where you would have a massive crust shift. 6,000 feet is crazy. Go ahead, bud.
All right. Yeah. No, I got nothing. Sorry. You're good.
Oh, okay. Sweet. Good. So, dude, I don't know how to think about that. 6,000 feet is really deep, bro. That's way deeper than 500 feet of from the last ice age. There's something going on there, man. 6,000 feet, and this is recent. This is recent. They're saying it's from the recent past, which is, if you're thinking recent past in geologic terms, you're talking less than 1 million years. That's how they're going to categorize that. Probably less than 500,000 years. You're probably talking within the ballpark of within the last 300,000 years, I would think, in the recent past. That's kind of like what it reads to me when I read about most of this stuff. All right. There's also fossils on top of the Azores Mountains. Fossils. Okay. Microscopic marine organisms whose shells accumulate in specific patterns depending on water depth and conditions. Okay. Analysis of these samples from the tops of some of the Azores seamounts has revealed that these fossils present are dramatically younger than the seamounts themselves. Dramatically younger than the seamounts themselves, which suggests that the tops of those seamounts were exposed to shallow water or subaerial conditions at a time when standard geological models say they should have been deep underwater. So there's a whole bunch of things happening here. You got the fossils. You got the fact that the top of the Azores are rounded off from wind erosion, right? Wind and rain erosion. You have rocks from 6,000 feet deep to have atmospheric erosion and not water erosion on them. Okay. Here's another thing. Sand deposits from the abyssal plain. Later oceanographic expeditions have reported recovering rounded sand samples, the kind of sand that forms in shallow coastal environments and shallow coastal environments only, from depths and locations where sand of that type should not exist. So really fucking deep, probably around 6,000 feet, like where they found those rocks. Okay. Some of the material has been dated to approximately 20,000 years ago. 20,000 years ago, those round pieces of sand, corresponding to the peak of the last ice age when global sea levels were at their lowest. But it's too deep. It's weird, man. There's some weird shit going on in the Azores, bro. All right, contested evidence. The geological community continues to debate exactly how much of the Azores Plateau was above water at the end of the last ice age, and whether the subsidence rates and the meltwater sea level rise combined to produce the pattern of geological features we now observe today. Okay, there's a guy named Rodney Castleton. He's a mainstream archaeologist. He's skeptical of the Atlantis hypothesis in general. Like in general, he's like, fuck that, it's bullshit. He argued that even at 200 meters lower sea levels in the Azores would remain separate islands. Okay. Other researchers, including a guy named Christian O'Brien, have argued that like bathymetric analysis suggests that basically the mid-Atlantic island, 480 by 720 kilometers before the end of the last ice age, was saying that it was absolutely exposed. Absolutely exposed. And all of the evidence points to that. All of it. It all points to it. The truth of the geological question is unresolved. What is not contested is that portions of the Azores Plateau were at various points in geological time well above sea level. The question of whether substantial habitable land was above sea level in the specific time frame of 12,000 to 4,000 years ago, because you're talking Younger Dryas to the Sea Peoples, right? Because the Sea Peoples were like, 1500-ish BC, probably a little bit before, like older than that, and all the way from the Younger Dryas. Okay. Which would be the relevant time frame for human civilization? It kind of remains open. So this is it's just a giant open question, dude. But the evidence is kind of becoming overwhelming that at the very least the Azores were absolutely above water, and a lot of it was above water, which would have meant it was the land between the lands. You talk about the Sea People. You talk about how their Atlantis was freaking west of like the Pillars of Hercules, right? Way out past the Mediterranean, the island people, the way the Egyptians. Anyway, dude, it all kind of comes together. And so, all right, the Riberino anomalies. Okay, these are the structures I'm talking about. These are structures, bro, that are down in the Azores. In the past decade, a guy named Nuno Ribeiro, he's president of the Portuguese Association of Archaeological Research. That's who this guy is. Has documented a series of anomalous structures on and around the Azores Islands that he argues may be anthropogenic, which means human-made. That's what that means. Made by humans, predating the Portuguese settlement of the islands in the 15th century. So remember, the most recent settlement of the Azores was in the 15th century or the 1400s by the Portuguese. Okay? He's saying this shit is wildly before that, obviously. And it's under fucking water, by the way, too. Okay. Romero's team has identified pyramid structures. Okay. In the Pico Island area, they've underground chambers with architectural features and rock art surrounding megalithic constructions that Riberino argues has similarities to megalithic art found across Central Europe and the world. Recent high-resolution bathymetric surveys conducted by the European Marine Observation and Data Network have revealed submerged features on the Azores Plateau that display, in Ribero's assessment, geometric and organized characteristics suggesting potential anthropogenic origin. When I say anthropogenic origin, human structures, man-made. Just keeps going, homie. Just keeps going, which is exactly the same pattern we saw at Göbekli Tepe right before the excavation, and with the submerged sites like in Egypt and the Philippines and all over the freaking place. The mainstream position is skeptical. The evidence has not yet been systematically investigated, and the reason the evidence has not been systematically investigated is in part because the mainstream position is skeptical and they refuse to open that box. That's why you need guys like this admiral. That's why you need guys that are independently doing these investigations outside of the university system, outside of academia. That's what you need. That's what you need for the LiDAR scans. That's what you need. Think about the satellite scans for the pyramids, right? Independent organization in Italy doing their own shit. If you count on Harvard or Michigan or one of these universities to do this stuff, dude, they will not pursue it, man. If it pushes the record. Go ahead, bud.
Well, and the biggest thing is funding for it. Like they're not going to get the funding if it's something that is considered myth or pseudoscience or whatever else, and having somebody who pushes that with their own money or research money that's not from, is like a big deal with it. And I think most of the deep sea exploration has been privately funded because it's such a big endeavor, like it's all been privately funded billionaires who go out and build these subs so they could, so yeah. So it will be interesting.
Yeah,
What
there's
happens,
a big one going on in Turkey right now too.
Billionaires out there,
right? These billionaires got to get interested. They got to listen to Rogan more, like Elon Musk. Some of them are pretty interested. Like Rogan's a good one because he's really into this kind of shit. And so there's a lot of people with money that listen to him. But there's another big ocean, like there's a big megalithic structure that was just found in Turkey underwater, like deep underwater, that they think is older than Göbekli Tepe for sure, and it has a bunch of spirals on it. It's done in the same relief way as it is in Göbekli Tepe, where you don't etch it in to the stone, it's pushed out from the stone. You know what I mean? It's pushed out from the stone, and so it's like way more advanced than just scraping into the stone. Like when you have to push the stone back everywhere else and then reveal a carving that pops out to you 3D, that's an entirely different world than digging your knife into a tree and writing something into a tree, which is kind of the other way of doing it. And so, all right, so some of the competing locations. So you have the Eye of the Sahara. It's an interesting one to me, right? The only problem is it's not in the Atlantic. It's not part of an island chain. It's not, west of, whatever the gates of Hercules and like all this other stuff that it's just not in the right, when you read the sources, dude. And biblical archaeology is like this too. Like you can use the Bible to find, like that's how they found, Sodom. Basically, they did use the geology of the landscapes of how the Bible kind of described it in Levant, and they were able to find it. You know what I mean? And so it's like the Eye of the Sahara, I think it's cool. I don't think that it's a natural thing. I think there's absolutely something to it. Who the fuck knows? Maybe it was attached to Atlantis. It could have been an outpost. Like the United States, we have 800 bases across the world right now. If the Atlanteans were that sophisticated, they might have had bases all over the world. I mean, who knows? But it's like that's one candidate. I think that's pretty interesting. It's called the Rosat structure, the Roshat structure or whatever, or the Eye of the Sahara. It's really cool looking, but I don't think that's it. Go ahead, bud.
Well, and with the Sahara, that's on like I want to say it's like a 20-year cycle of being a place where you could plant and grow and then being an arid desert, so that'd be really interesting to discover there because that's almost like layers of 10. Yeah, that's what I couldn't remember. Is for some reason I almost said 11 and then I was like, I'll shoot big. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see like with like if that happens every 10,000 years, how many civilizations have been buried?
Oh, a ton, dude. Deeper you go, bro. You just got to keep digging. You know what I mean? Like for sure it'd be a ton of civilizations. I think we go back, bro. Back. I think we go way the fuck back. And so anyway, the Roshat structure, really interesting, super cool. If you're out there, you should look it up anyway, just because of how cool looking it is. And it's in the Sahara. Also another one is there was something called the Santorini collapse. All right, so that was a volcanic eruption of Thera, and this was around 1600 BC. It devastated the Minoan civilization in Crete. I've seen a documentary about this. It's mainstream academic candidates, so academia, those that do believe that Atlantis actually existed, that's what they think it is for the most part, okay? It has real evidentiary support. It does if you take the timeline of like the sea peoples with like the moon being a year rather than a year cycle being a year, like a month cycle for the moon, right? It lines up to that if that's what they're talking about. All right. The eruption was massive. The Minoan civilization did collapse, And Plato's description of a large civilization destroyed by geological catastrophe fits the general narrative and shape. It does not, however, fit the geography. It does not fit the geography at all, or the description of where it was. Santorini is in the eastern Mediterranean. It's not beyond the Pillar of Hercules. It's not in the Atlantic. It's not islands in the Atlantic. It does not fit the scale of the Atlantean civilization Plato describes, or any of these other historians describe. It just doesn't. It's like the Rorschach structure, right? Or the Eye of the Sahara. Like, it does not fit the geographic location of the description that's described literally from the Gauls of fucking Northern Europe all the way down to Egypt. Describe it in a completely different location. Okay. The Bahamas banks of the Bohemian Road. This is something that Graham Hancock's talked about. He does not say that it's Atlantis, but he has investigated the Bohemian Road. It's an underwater structure off Bohemian. First discovered in 1968, have been argued by alternative researchers to be the remains of a submerged civilization. I do believe that. It's in the Bahamas, just south of basically Florida. The mainstream position is that they're natural beach rock formations. The Bahama banks were substantially larger dry land during the last ice age when sea levels were 120 meters, like 500 feet lower, right? So when sea levels were super duper lower, like that road would have been above water. And when you look underneath it, the cool thing about the Bohemian Road is there's actually little rocks that support those. The reason I cannot think that this is natural is because, first of all, it's flat and square. Second of all, there's rocks underneath these big, thick, kind of flat rocks that level out. They're like levelers, and they level out this road. So you can actually dive down there. I've never done this, but I saw like a documentary thing on it. You can dive down there and just look underneath the Bohemian Road, and you can see these different little like rock things that are underneath it that are leveling it, if that makes sense, making the road kind of level, you know? And so I don't think that that's Atlantis, but I do think that that is some kind of ancient society, civilization, people, structure thing, because during the Ice Age, that was all of the Bahamas, Virgin Islands, like all the way into Florida. Dude, Florida might have been connected down into the islands. You know what I mean? If you think about it, right? Like it might have all been connected, like one solid landmass, basically from like the Virgin Islands, the Bahamas, like into Florida, like. But it could have been like Doggerland. It would have been a big, or the Philippines or Hawaii, or like a lot of these places. It would have been a bigger landmass, right? Interesting. Okay, here's another one. Doggerland of the North Sea. Doggerland. We've talked about this because they actually talk about like they have oral traditions of Atlanteans coming over there, right? The region between Britain and continental Europe, which was inhabited by Mesolithic peoples until it flooded, catastrophically flooded, like at the Younger Dryas event. All right. So around 9,000 BC-ish. Real documented, fits some elements of the flood tradition, but it does not fit the geography. Again, it just does not fit the geography of where the location was. I think that the people shotgunned out whoever was left, and they left mythological traditions, right, of whatever this was, but it does not fit. Antarctica. Based on the Parry-Reis map of 1513, which predates the discovery of Antarctica. Some researchers, included Charles Hapgood, argued depicts of an ice-free Antarctic coastline that would have required knowledge from before the last ice age. I think that there's a lot going on in Antarctica. A lot. Right? I think that there is a really cool place to investigate. I think that the land underneath it is probably filled with all kinds of goodies, just like the Sahara and just like the Amazon. I think if it was Atlantis, it would have had to that Adam and Eve story that I talked about, where you get the mantle becomes lucid and the plate tectonics were able to shift freely on top of it. And there's some kind of something to do with the pole shift taking place, like a dramatic pole shift happening. And it basically just sends land flying in different directions, creating catastrophic tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanoes. It would set off all kinds of crazy shit. Can you imagine what would happen, dude, if North America and like Europe just suddenly shifted fucking 100 miles to the left? I mean, that's like, right, dude, it'd be some pretty crazy shit going on. And so like Antarctica, if that theory is correct with the Adam and Eve book, then it's possible that Antarctica was in a different place than it is now. It was in a different place than it is now. You know what I mean? But it's weird that it was in those maps, dude. It's in maps that predate the discovery of Antarctica. Go ahead.
If I think, like if you think about it, like all these places that you're just talking about, not all of them, but the majority of them would have been coastal regions next to the water, you know, and whether, I guess this kind of goes back to like my hypothesis, whether it was Atlantis, like there's probably all these stories that people have, you know, it was probably just if it wasn't Atlantis, it was just another civilization that came from there, you know, that was seafaring, you know, like to me, it makes a lot of sense that all these big continental places where the landmass would be, whether it was the bottom of Florida, whether it was the dog land, I fucked it up. That one, you know, like they were all places that are now underwater. Yeah, Doggerland, but they're all, if it was next to water and it was inhabitable, saying it wasn't under ice, there's a good chance that there were people there. And we've just dismissed, or it's been too hard to do the research in those areas. Coral grows on stuff, you dismiss it as something else, you know, you move on, you move past, you know. And but it would, and especially with all the stuff we're finding out about humans and other species like Neanderthals, Denisovan, all those, you know, like who's to say that there wasn't a group of those that were one of the, you know, like I just think it's yeah, it's cool shit.
Oh yeah. And those, yeah, and the Neanderthals and Denisovans were a lot smarter than we thought they were.
Yeah.
One more thing to go, we're good. So we're gonna end it with this, folks. We're gonna end it with this. 5 more minutes. Stick with us. Okay. So bringing it back to the Azores. All right. So where does that leave us at the end of this episode? All right. 9 ancient sources spanning 800 years describe a large island civilization in the Atlantic Ocean destroyed by catastrophic geological events whose survivors migrated eastward and westward from the site of their lost homeland. Not one source, 9 sources. 9 sources. This may even include Quetzalcoatl going to South America. Okay. In the 12th century BC, exactly the historical moment when a scattered maritime population would have appeared in the Eastern Mediterranean, the sea peoples arrived in Egypt with a coherent naval technology and the level of organization the Egyptians had never accounted from any previous population ever before in their history. The Egyptians themselves recorded in their own words, quote, "The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray," end quote, saying that the sea peoples had their lands destroyed. All right. In the North Atlantic Ocean and the Mid-Atlantic Ridge sits the Azores Plateau, 400,000 square kilometers, 20 to 30 kilometers of the thickest crust that is representing continental crust, not oceanic crust. Rock samples showing atmospheric weathering patterns at 6,000 feet below the freaking water. Fossils on submerged seamounts that are dramatically younger than the seamounts themselves. And also UNESCO's, remember the UN's scientific discovery thing, own tentative listing and acknowledging that many of the seamounts were emerged in the past and not totally submerged, but at one point in time had been above freaking sea level, and the fact that the top of all those mountains have fucking weathering, wind erosion, rain erosion. They were not underwater. Okay. And a contemporary Portuguese archaeologist arguing that structures, dude, on the surviving islands and structures visible using their scientific equipment data that are human made, megalithic structures underwater that are human made. It's not proof, but it's a body of evidence substantial enough that the standard dismissal, Atlantis is the thing that Plato made up, does not survive the actual documented record, the ancient record or the geological record. It does not survive that scrutiny. It cannot. Okay. The independent ancient sources across 800 years describe the lost Atlantic civilization, and if the historical record of the Bronze Age collapse fits the pattern of scattered survivors from a maritime catastrophe, and if the Azores Plateau shows the geological signatures of a formerly emerged landmass then why is the mainstream archaeological position still that Atlantis was invented by Plato is philosophical fiction? Doesn't really make sense to me, homie. Doesn't make sense to me. And I think the big problem is they don't take the totality of circumstances. They limit their knowledge to one thing, one source, one idea, and they move on. You know what I mean? When you take the totality, when you investigate all of it together, all of the cultures, language, societies, geography, oceanography, erosion, stories, like if you put it all together, it becomes pretty undisputable that something else was going on. You know what I mean?
Well, and I kind of think this all goes back to certain groups of people wanting Mesopotamia to be the Mecca of where life became like begun and any like civilization as we think of modern civilization. Yeah, you know. So I think that's a lot of it, you know, and I think that's a narrative that was pushed down our throat for it was easy and it fit up with the Bible and everything else. So
Yep. All right, people. Appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Thanks for listening. We really do appreciate you. Get on to what's that platform, Joel? Give that platform. We got a shout out really quick. You know, I want people to go on there and give us some freaking ideas for people to interview and questions to ask.
Patreon,
baby. Good job, Joel. I'm terrible with that name. Don't know what it is. Appreciate you though. Get onto our Patreon, people. Follow us on there. All right, all of our episodes are on there too. We're trying to slowly climb this ladder a little bit, and so we're just doing this, just the two of us, man. This is just me and Joel. That's it, and that's all. And then whoever the hell's listening, the 7 people that are listening. So I love you, brother. Go get some food, man.
I appreciate you. All right, later, brother. Love you, man. Take it easy.
Peace. Black Army Radio.